She is the eco-journalist who joins us on Thursdays. We do a segment called It's the Planet Stupid. You can find her on social media reporting generally positive stories about the planet, even as we seem determined as a species to destroy it. She's Belinda Waymouth, everybody. Hi, Belinda.
Good morning. Good morning, you guys. How are you?
We are well. We are well. I was reading some of the materials that you sent along ahead of your appearance, and it seemed I was discouraged by the fact that it doesn't seem as though the world, as reflected by world leaders, are really riding to the rescue of the environment. We're just finishing up this conference on the environment that you were talking about last time, and it's one of a couple of conferences. I wonder if you could speak to both.
Yeah, absolutely. COP27 is, it's not going so well.
That's the one that's going on now in Egypt. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is about climate change, and this is about how do we mitigate, how do we adapt? And the big theme, like I was saying last week, is this loss and damage fund. And developing, emerging nations are really stamping their feet and saying, hey, you guys who put all the carbon emissions up into the atmosphere and have caused all this terrible weather that we are really bearing the brunt of, the sea level is rising on our Pacific islands, Pakistan, as had those terrible floods this year, a third of the country underwater for months. Now there are terrible floods happening in Nigeria. And they are really aggressively, fighting for this loss and damage fund. And it was the big theme. And, the developed countries are kind of really pulling back on it. China is doing this thing where they're using these old international treaties where they were designated a developing nation to try and get out of their responsibility for funding loss and damage. And they are now the second largest economy and the biggest emitter of CO2. So
that's insanity.
It's just crazy.
So in essence, you're suggesting. I mean, it's clear. Look, the U.S. and China, they should be on the cutting edge of setting the pace to cut back on emissions. Instead, they're looking for legal loopholes by which they might be able to evade emissions controls completely.
No, it's not emissions controls. It's they don't want to have to fund the adaptation and mitigation for developing nations. So they have actually said, yes, we're going to, still try and, what the G20 just said, world leaders at the G20 just said, we will still be pursuing efforts to limit temperature increase to the 1.5 degrees Celsius. But really COP27 has sort of boiled down to this, can we hold on to the 1.5 degrees Celsius, target, to limit warming to that? Because at one point, India and China were saying, hey, what about if we go back to the old number and say we can heat up to 2 degrees Celsius? And it's like, no, guys, we have to stay at the 1.5. That's what has been, designated as being the only safe place to be. And we're not on target to reach that right now. But the real haggling that's happening is over this money. And what developed nations have said is, look, we want to do this targeted funding to the countries that are most, adversely affected by climate change. What's happening is there's this group of countries, it's called the G77, and those are the developing nations. And when the G77 were first, they originated in 1964, part of the UN, there were 77 nations. Now there are 134 nations that are classified as developing. And they're the ones that are jumping up and down saying, hey, we need money. And what's
by the way, essentially they changed the terminology around third world. They don't call them third world anymore. They call them developing. At least that's my understanding. So, just to recalibrate, the verbiage. We used to say these are third world nations. We're first world nation. Now they call those third world nations emerging nations, right? Yes. Emerging economies. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. We're seen as too derogatory. Third world nations, second world, and then But just from the numbers, if you've got 134 of these nations out of 197 countries in the world, a lot of the world is in that category. So what's happened is the EU has got this deal, this has come out of, COP and obviously been talked about, we're going to give $1 billion to Africa. Well, $1 billion, that's great, but it's nowhere near, the 100 billion that was talked about, that's what the, developed world needed to, provide to the developing world. And then, last year, the numbers went down to, 20 billion and maybe doubling it to 40. But I'll tell you what really got my attention is a couple of days ago, Joe Biden is asking Congress to give the go-ahead for a, $34 billion to go to the Ukraine. And we are perfectly happy as the world is giving the Ukraine money. And absolutely, I agree, the Ukraine needs money. They have had this aggressive invasion by another country. It's a brutal war. They're really suffering. But so far, the world has given about $94 billion to the Ukraine. And here we are, at COP27 saying, no, we don't want to be funding, climate change mitigation and adaptation for, the emerging nations of the world. And I'm like, what? Excuse me? A war, yes, but because this is sort of, I don't want to put it in, really sort of couch it in terms of climate change being a war, but this is going to be like a campaign, for these countries to deal with, what's coming at them.
Yeah, it is a war. It's an environmental war. The damage is done. Just because you mentioned Ukraine, I want to make this quick note, and then I want to move on just so we don't run out of time. But the bill for Ukraine, as you suggest, is close to $40 billion, just this latest package, okay?
Yeah, and we've already given tons.
And these are all offensive weapons. These are all, or you want to call them defensive weapons, but they're weapons for war. Or there's other sorts of aid wrapped up in that as well. But if there's a criticism for that, and I think there is, it's that it's all happening so quickly that no one knows where the money's going. It's a little like the way the Iraq War was being handled. There's a lot of waste, but I'm talking tremendous amounts of waste on a percentage basis. But more to the point that I'm trying to make, once the war ends, hoping it ends soon, but it may not, there's going to be a bill for rebuilding Ukraine. And that bill will dwarf this bill. It'll be hundreds of billions of dollars. Yeah, it will be. And so when you talk about the war that we have to fight to keep our environment in any way manageable, these monies have to be found. And we're busy tossing money into the fire on Ukraine. Again, we may have a moral imperative to do it on one level, but there has to be attention paid to the environmental fight that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings me to COP15, which is about to happen in Montreal. And this is the biodiversity conference that's going to happen. And this is, all about, how do we stop this sixth mass extinction that's happening, in the natural world right now. And the thing that, people, we have to wrap our heads around this. Nature, the global commons, provides invaluable climate change and adaptation services. The ocean, as we were talking about when we discussed plastics a couple of weeks ago and the damage they're doing in the ocean, we need to keep the ocean healthy because it sucks up a third of our CO2 emissions. So this conference that's about to happen in Montreal, super important. And the crazy thing is it's being overseen, it's China again. It's being overseen by China, which is the first time China is presiding over a major UN agreement. And so far, the Chinese leaders have been playing sort of a really modest role. And this is a really important, conference. It was supposed to happen, obviously, in China because they're the presiding country. But because of, COVID pandemic delays, it got moved to Canada. And then the big fear is that, Beijing isn't inviting world leaders to it because they don't want to embarrass their leader, Xi Jinping, because he's not expected to even go to it. And, you read that and you just sort of like, oh, people,
Yeah,
hello?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Is there Is there a plan? I mean, if China's overseeing it, is there a strategy that is even a loose strategy laid out, or what is the even short-term future for that?
Well, there was a side meeting at COP27, the climate change talks in Egypt. So they did have 30 countries were talking about it. They've got a framework. What's happening with biodiversity loss is that, really it's sort of a bit like climate change. It's nation by nation, as to how we, what we've set up is this, 30 by 30, that by 2030, 30% of our waters and 30% of our land in the US will be protected. And that's super ambitious and great. And we are getting, a lot of these marine protected areas in the ocean. But, what people have to really, the climate and nature, those two agendas are absolutely entwined. And, to have international agreements on what we do to save biodiversity, because the other thing is everything is, interconnected. The oceans and the atmosphere, they connect all countries. So if you're polluting like crazy in your country, as my husband likes to say to me, you can run, but you can't hide. That stuff is, it's a global problem. So, these conferences are really about our collective well-being. And, I think that, I just see it like it's a schoolyard, and it's everyone from kindergartners to, seniors in high school. And, you've got the tough and heavy and, the big players and the smaller players. And we're really squabbling right now. And we need to get beyond that. We need to really sit down and come together.
Well, but what you're talking about for this meeting, we're talking to Belinda Waymouth, who is an eco-journalist and watches this stuff. And what you're talking about in this summit that takes place in Montreal is that you're not getting that buy-in. At least there's no, unless they're sending others, you're saying world leaders are not planning on attending that summit?
Well, the thing is, they say that, Beijing hasn't invited world leaders because they don't think Xi Jinping is going to attend. And if he doesn't attend, and other world leaders do, it will be an embarrassment.
Sure, I get it. And but can't he attend virtually? Can you throw that into the? I mean, can't he zoom into the meeting?
Ooh, it's a wild idea.
I'm just saying, it's not like it's unprecedented.
Yeah, I'll get on the phone to Xi this afternoon, and I'll get on it, Mark, because I'm with you. I believe it's super important.
I mean, even a virtual presence, my point is, would be helpful. It helps elevate and create some momentum, I think, to this entire thing.
Yeah, well, COP27 was sort of falling apart until, they went back to world leaders who, moved on from Egypt last week to Indonesia for, the G20. And, and then they got pressed and they said, yes, we will still, pursue our efforts to limit temperature increase to this 1.5 degrees Celsius, after it seemed like that was falling apart in Egypt. And I mean, what they're saying at COP27 is they think the most they're going to get out of it is to hold to that target, amount of warming, the 1.5 degrees Celsius, that they'll be able to hold on to that because it looked like that was going to slip away, and that there will be incremental steps made towards, these loss and damage funds that the G77 are saying, are imperative for their survival. And, like I was saying last week, what's happening to the planet is going to lead to, a lot of climate refugees. If we don't like what's happening with, migration, right now, that is only going to be exacerbated by, climate change, famines, droughts. People are going to be on the move.
Certainly that's true. Exacerbated is a ding word, by the way, please. Yeah, I think that's undeniably the case. It's already happening with, famine-driven refugee crises across Africa, et cetera. But I mean, I think increasingly famine is going to be the ripple effect of climate change, of the climate crisis. And as you see these ecosystems crater in the ocean, particularly, and across the globe, I really was glad to see that there is at least this summit planned for Canada, where we're talking about protecting some of these habitats. We're talking about an extinction here of massive proportion, man-made. And the idea that, we can't get the countries to show up for that, it's really, it's astounding to me. And as you said once, it's because it's happening sort of on a global level more slowly, but now it would seem as though it's pretty clear and it's happening more rapidly, Belinda. You have to wrap up here, but just a minute or two, please.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, everyone kept on talking about, 2050 was going to be, when things got really bad. Well, I would say that's happened already. I mean, I think it happened back in 2015 when it was so hot in Pakistan and India, the pavements were melting and all the people were, dying from the heat waves. One thing that did happen this week, which I was a little gobsmacked and very happy to hear, Jeff Bezos, however we pronounce his name correctly, has said that he's going to devote his fortune to climate change and also to funding and supporting better political systems around the world. And I kept on thinking, man, that guy's only spending his money on trying to go to Mars to save life on Earth. Well, now he's actually talking about using, that huge fortune, on this very issue. So I thought that was super promising because, it's going to be all hands on deck. And if world leaders are dilly-dallying, yes, we need the private sector to step in. And like I always say on the show, because I'm going to end it on something positive, Mark, I am.
Oh, okay. Well, that's remarkable.
Yeah, but we are making this move to renewables in spite of what world leaders are doing. I mean, I tweeted this morning about, Scotland and England and the battery systems that they're going to have, solar and wind power. This is happening and we're going to move to renewable energy. And what we need to do then is help, these developing nations do it quickly as well, bypass oil and gas. A lot of them are on coal right now. Okay, get off the coal, but, not to start using natural gas. Let's get you straight to, the sun, because the sun is where it's at.
Well, they have to scale that up and you're right. I mean, the one thing that's happened is perhaps that with the rising cost of energy, that's become more economical. That was certainly the hope. The scalability is there, but it has to be pursued aggressively. So I guess, I am encouraged by some of what you say. I feel as though the alarm is going off, and I don't know that the world is responding in such as though an alarm is going off. You can find Belinda at Belinda Waymouth, Waymouth. A lot of love for you in the chat. People say that you should speak at the conference.
Yes.
Yeah. But more than anything, a lot of thanks for you. And Belinda is amazing. Thank you very much for having her on the show. Yeah, really cool. That's from Sandbug. All right, listen. Let's talk next. Oh, are you going to be with us next? No, you're not. You're missing a week. Is that right?
Yeah, I have to miss 2 weeks, I'm afraid. Next week I'm going to be giving.
What?
I'm so sorry. I will miss you. But I'm going to.
Maybe you can still push along some things we should talk about if you run across anything. No obligation, but just saying, if you would, that'd be great. Thank you, Belinda Waymouth, again, all across social media. We love having you here. Thanks, Belinda.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah.